Chapter 2. An overview observation of global sustainable development problematics. International system is the global platform where the major actors in international politics operate and relate. These major actors include nation-states, international institutions, non-governmental organizations, terrorists, multinationals, transnational organizations and eminent personalities. Both states and international institutions operate within the international system, and international relations are also conducted within the system with diverse policies emerging from states. International institutions like United Nations Organization (UN), Organization of Petroleum Economic Cooperation (OPEC), Economic Cooperation of West African States (ECOWAS), etc. The creation of nation-states where members advance their interests, come together to do trade-ups and discuss issues of general concern as well as proffering solutions to common problems. However, many issues ranging from wars, nuclear and conventional, as well as small arms weapons proliferation, poverty, hunger, refugee crisis, diseases to terrorism plague the present system. The global world of today is where the capability to destroy the world 100 times over is real, where terrorist strikes come without warning, where thousands die especially in developing countries each day from poverty-related diseases, where war continues to ravage different regions without solution in sight, where migration is frowned at and increasing blocked by developed nations, where the number of world refugees have become overwhelming for international community to deal with, where slave trade has resurfaced and practiced with impunity, where universal human rights protection have become hypocritical, and where rise of populist and anti-globalist has become the order of the day. All these pervade the contemporary international system because power politics and pursuit of national interest have taken precedence over global cooperation that liberalists favor. Realism seems to be whining again, as the United Nations looks incapacitated to deal with world-overwhelming problems in the increasing pursuit of the self-interest of states and their allies. In the contemporary international system, national interest ideology has become more important than ever, and it does not matter whose oxes go red. States' survival and security remain the key, and not necessarily human or global survival. The present nature of the contemporary international system plays a key role in the migration crisis today. In the international system, it may be observed that local conflicts and violence are becoming a commonplace, and disregard for the common good is exploited by the global economy in order to impose a single cultural model which unifies the world, but divides persons and nations, making some poor and others rich. The massified world promotes individual interests and weakens the communitarian dimension of life. The advance of this kind of globalism strengthens the identity of the more powerful, who can protect themselves, but it tends to diminish the identity of the weaker and poorer regions, making them more vulnerable and dependent. In this way, political life for them becomes increasingly fragile in the face of transnational economic powers that operate with the principle of divide and conquer, and loot the mineral resources that can be found. As Pope Francis observed, there is a lack of a plan to accommodate everyone both at the local, national and international levels. Generally, political life today no longer has to do with healthy debates about long-term plans to improve people's lives and to advance the common good, but only with slick marketing techniques primarily aimed at discrediting others. The elderly, especially in the West, did not have to die the way they did in many countries during the coronavirus pandemic, COVID-19. Before then, something similar had long been occurring during heat waves, and in other situations, older people found themselves cruelly abandoned. Humanity fails to realize that by isolating the elderly and leaving them in the care of others without the closeness and concern of family members, we disfigure and impoverish the family itself. We also end up depriving young people of a necessary connection to the roots and a wisdom that the young cannot achieve on their own. New forms of cultural colonization are emerging, making peoples abandon the tradition, and either from a craze to mimic others or to foment violence, or from unpardonable negligence or apathy. People in this category allow others to rob them of the very souls and end up losing the spiritual identity, the moral consistency and, in the end, their intellectual, economic and political independence. Pope Francis, 2020, paragraph 11. Wealth has increased, but so also inequality, giving way to new form of poverty. The claim that the modern world has reduced poverty is made by measuring poverty with criteria from the past that do not correspond to present-day realities. In the past, for example, lack of access to electric energy was not considered a sign of poverty, nor was it a source of hardship. Today, poverty must be understood and gauged in the context of the actual opportunities available in each concrete historical period. The observations of Pope Francis in respect of poverty in the following paragraphs are apt. Similarly, the organization of societies worldwide is still far from reflecting clearly that women possess the same dignity and identical rights as men. We say one thing with words, but our decisions and reality tell another story. Indeed, doubly poor are those women who endure situations of exclusion, mistreatment and violence, since they are frequently less able to defend the rights. Pope Francis, 2020, paragraph 20. It should also be recognized that, even though the international community has adopted numerous agreements aimed at ending slavery in all its forms, and has launched various strategies to combat this phenomenon, millions of people today, children, women and men of all ages, are deprived of freedom and forced to live in conditions akin to slavery. Today, as in the past, slavery is rooted in a notion of the human person that allows him or her to be treated as an object, whether by coercion or deception, or by physical or psychological duress. Human persons created in the image and likeness of God are deprived of the freedom, sold and reduced to being the property of others. They are treated as means to an end. Criminal networks are skilled in using modern means of communication as a way of luring young men and women in various parts of the world. A perversion that exceeds all limits when it subjugates women and then forces them to abort. An abomination that goes to the length of kidnapping persons for the sake of selling their organs. Trafficking in persons and other contemporary forms of enslavement are a worldwide problem that needs to be taken seriously by humanity as a whole, since criminal organizations employ global networks to achieve the goals. Efforts to eliminate this phenomenon also demand a common and, indeed, a global effort on the part of various sectors of society. Pope Francis, 2020, par 22. Furthermore, the loneliness, fear and insecurity experienced by those who feel abandoned by the system creates a fertile terrain for various mafias. These flourish because they claim to be defenders of the forgotten, often by providing various forms of assistance even as they pursue the criminal interests. There also exists a typically mafioso pedagogy that, by appealing to a false communitarian mystique, creates bonds of dependency and fealty from which it is very difficult to break free. Pope Francis, 2020, in practical terms, human rights are not equal for all, hence the lack of social and economic development in many countries. When the dignity of the human person is respected, and his or her rights recognized and guaranteed, creativity and interdependence thrive, and the creativity of the human personality is released through actions that further the common good. Pope Francis, 2020, paragraph 18. In addition, other perspectives of environmental reality include the right of an individual to own property and theory of property rights, which exhibits the characteristics of a. the right to use the good property, b. the right to earn income from the good, c. the right to transfer the good to others, and d. the right to enforce property rights. Jongwook, K. and Mahoney, J. 2002. Economists such as Adam Smith and Karl Marx viewed property rights as very important in the process of economic development. It is widely believed that property rights precipitates incentives for people to take part in and contribute activities such as investments and trade. According to Adam Smith, the expectation of profit from improving one's stock of capital rests on the private property rights. Capitalization has a central assumption that property rights encourage the holders to develop the property, generate wealth and efficiently allocate resources based on the operations of markets. Karl Marx propounded the Marxist theory, which states that capitalists are always under the urge to exert their influence in the society, and the possession of property is one way to do so. Through the control of property, they can control the state and exert their interest on others. There is a positive correlation between property rights and economic growth, and property growth and foreign investments. Put in another way, there is a connection between properties and economic development. In relation to the developing countries, the following may be observed. The late 1990s were characterized by widespread and deepening global skepticism and mistrust toward international economic institutions. In the immediate past decade, globalization was being viewed by many developing countries as a dynamic force which is imposing the will of rich corporate enterprises against the needs of the wretched of the earth. Hence the proposal of the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, OECD, for a multilateral agreement on investment (MIE) was greeted with outright rejection by the developing countries. The Asian crisis only exacerbated the infamous burdens of the World Bank and International Monetary Fund (IMF), following over a decade of structural adjustment imposition on developing countries. During the Ukraine and Russian war, many universal assumptions were shattered as expressed by a journalist. These assumptions that were considered as the basis of cooperation among nations, states and citizens were broken and no longer operational. The following are some of the examples of events. The assumption and belief of Chinese that all public platforms of the West were neutral and would not be interrupted no matter what happens. Unfortunately, the platforms announced the participation in sanctions against Russia during the Ukraine and Russian war. A large number of foreign internet service operators headed by the United States announced sanctions against Russia and launched a disconnection action against Russia. The second is the removal of major Russian banks from the US-controlled SWIFT system, making it impossible for major Russian banks to conduct global transactions and settlements. Immediately after the outbreak of the Russian-Ukrainian war, a mysterious hacker group, obviously the cyber army behavior of some government organizations, attacked the Russian Space Control Center, and claimed to have shut down the Russian Space Center and successfully made all Russian satellites out of control. The Russian Space Control Center said it was indeed attacked, but the security system automatically obscured the attack and repelled it. Does this suggest that warfare has extended into space? This is in violation of some previous propaganda that satellites in space are safe and will not be attached and space wars will not break out. After the outbreak of the Russian-Ukrainian war, the entire Western countries immediately erupted and all the assets of the government and private individuals overseas were looted. Not only the bank assets were frozen, but even the luxury yachts, jets and private residences of the Russians overseas were taken away. Switzerland is a neutral country and it is absolutely safe to store money in Switzerland. This is in the consciousness of the Chinese. Unfortunately, after the outbreak of the Russian-Ukrainian war, Switzerland immediately gave up its neutral position, announced its participation in sanctions against Russia, and froze all Russian funds in Swiss banks, thus uncovering the hypocrisy that Switzerland is a pure financial land.
The complete volume of the chapter of this book is available on Amazon. Kindly subscribe and enjoy the next chapter of this educational documentary series. Thanks for watching and recommendation. Professor Doku Oyeshola, OP.
Link up with Environmental Tonic on YouTube for more environmental hints.